Hi, I'm Oliver, and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. Okay, so this is the second video in the Deep Cuts Essential series. Last time I did John Frusciante's Curtains. That was my first Deep Cuts Essential. It's taken me way longer than I wanted to get this video out, to be honest, but I'm still getting used to scheduling all the videos in and getting everything out on the channel, so just bear with me. So the second Deep Cuts Essential is the hallowed and revered Laughingstock by Talk Talk, a gorgeous left field record that takes inspiration from jazz and the surprising power of quiet. The creation of this record alongside the life cycle of this band seemed to be the stuff of legend these days. Despite the success they were receiving, band leader and vocalist Mark Hollis wanted for something more, so alongside bassist Paul Webb and also drummer Lee Harris, they started an altogether different musical path. Third record, 1986's The Colour of Spring, begins that new sound. This is where the sound begins to change. It's a more sophisticated album. It has more of an art rock sound than a synth pop sound. And then the follow-up to that's even crazier. 1988's Spirit of Eden is proving that the band's trying to strike out an altogether completely different legacy. It's an experimental album, a world away from those synth pop beginnings. By the time it came to record Laughingstock, the band were in a weird situation because they'd managed to alienate a lot of their original fan base that were into that synth pop sound of the 80s. And also they were battling through this difficult court battle with EMI because they wanted to be out of their contract because they felt they were restricted in some way to obviously follow that musical path that they'd begun with The Colour of Spring, and they'd really continued in earnest on Spirit of Eden. Additionally, original bassist Paul Webb also left the band around this time, so that left Mark Hollis and Lee Harris to hunker down under the Verve Jazz label and record this absolute masterpiece. I think it can end up sounding like a bit of a cliche when you say that an album is capable of creating a unique sonic space, because, you know, music is an endless revision of different ideas and sounds, right? But in the case of Laughingstock, I truly believe that this album does create a unique sonic space, seriously. This is a record that coalesces and flows unlike almost anything I've ever listened to before. It purposefully eschews conventionality and instead favours anticlimax and uncertainty. This sound is the result of a very unconventional recording environment with scores of musicians invited into the studio, a studio that was barred of any natural light. All the clocks were taken away and the only light in the room was oil projectors and strobes, and they were I'll say forced, I mean I'm sure they were paid, but they were made to play along to these tracks for hours and just improvise and see where the music would take them. Often they'd not actually heard the track they were playing along to or recording to, they only knew a chord structure. So there was all of this uncertainty going on, which must have been a very strange environment to record an album in. I mean, they had no idea if their music would be heard on the final cut, and many musicians that took part in these recording sessions didn't end up on the final cut. I think something like 50 musicians were used for the original recording, and perhaps 16 or 17 ended up on the final album. Mark Hollis, alongside the producer Tim Freeze-Green and the engineer Phil Brown, sat in that studio for close to 6 months listening to hours and hours of material they'd recorded and started aggressively slicing things up and adding them together to create what would become the album Laughingstock. It just sounds bloody exhausting. Imagine listening to that much material. It must have been probably less than 10% of what they recorded overall was used in that album. But it was worth it. You know, I want this series to introduce records that, if you haven't already heard them, offer a new kind of listening experience, and this album does that, I think. You know, Laughingstock is the musical equivalent of a heart in a jar. It's been there since 1991 and it's never stopped beating. It's defying the laws of biology with a kind of spiritual magic, and I think those two words sum up Laughingstock as a record. You know, naturalistic, biological, but also spiritual. I realise I just said 2 words and I did 3 words, just ignore that. This quote from an interview with Mark Hollis pretty much sums up this idea. The last thing I would ever want to do is intellectualise music, because that's never been what it's about for me. Nothing has changed from the ethic of the last album, and I would never want that to change because I can't see any way of improving upon that process. As before, silence is the most important thing you have. 1 note is better than 2. Spirit is everything, and technique, although it has a degree of importance, is always secondary. Opening track Merman utilises that idea of space and silence, utilising a finite number of components in the song. You have the whole track anchored with that opening chord which is awash with reverb. It rings out on the track. You have these percussive hits that are quite abstract. You have horns joining. You have the gentle warmth of an acoustic upright bass. I love Mark Hollis's vocals across the entire record. In a way, I feel like they kind of clash because you have music that's so naturalistic sounding, so gentle, almost pastoral in a way. Having this vocal coming out of nowhere, it's almost a bit jarring, but it's the way that he conveys his melancholy, that's the sound that you get in his intonation. It also acts as this intermittent reflection of the mood of the music, and that just works beautifully. Mark Hollis's lyrics seem to be rarely discussed when Talk is brought up in conversation. However, I think there's a real poetic beauty to them. If you just take, for example, on the brooding track Ascension Day, Hollis sings, "Weighted my hand, kill the bet, I'll burn on Judgment Day. Weighted my hand, get hard, hit, to sin to sail." Alongside the organ that's used on this track, it creates this stark, biblical ambience, which is carried along by Harris's unconfined drums, which were inspired sonically by the kind of drums used on Can's Targo Margo record. The undefined essence of this record, a lot of that is achieved by the long, lengthy sessions in the studio from different session musicians that were then cut down by Hollis and co, moved around, fragmented, added, and that created that unrefined, undefined sort of style. But also it's down to the recording technique as well. So for the drums, a Neumann U47 was used, which is a tube valve microphone. So instead of setting up the kit with sort of 10 microphones as you normally would to achieve greater clarity, only one microphone was used, and that creates so much more of a wayward, distant sound. Now, it still anchors the track. The drums still anchor the track as drums usually do, but they do it in a way that's a little bit more distant and allows the other musical sounds to coalesce and flow in a way that I don't think would if the drums were so forward in the mix. If there ever was a track that succeeded in sonically embodying that typical cliche of underwater music, I think After the Flood achieves it. You have this Hammond organ, which is the heart and soul of the track, and that sound ripples through the myriad of instrumentation, and everything converges and sort of laps against the edge of the musical space. I'm aware of how fucking pretentious that sounds, but I think if you listen to the track, you'll understand what I mean. Please just go and do it so you don't think I'm pretentious, please. Speaking of the instrumentation, it's crazy varied across this record. It employs so many different kinds of instrumentation. You have cellos, violas, violins, melodica, variophone, harmonica, the traditional drums and bass and guitar along with those too. And the whole result of that, it adds to that unrefined sound. It's like a massive, beautiful, overgrown garden where nature's taken over. New Grass is one of my favourite pieces of music ever. It's a beautiful guitar refrain linchpinned by this faint, washed out groove. The whole track is eggshell fragile and so emotive. Lifted up, reflective and returning love you sing. Errant days filled me, fed me illusion's gate, intemperate stream welled up within me. Even Hollis's vocal rhythm on this track is unfixed, syllables stretching across bars, words intermingling with another. And really, I don't think there's any other way you could include vocals on a track like this without ruining the majesty of it. Utterly stunning track. Closing track Runai embodies a kind of triumphant ending in its use of silence and space and a gentle crackle of an amplifier, and it's all those things that Hollis talked about in the excerpt that I gave earlier. It's the power of economy, of allowing music to breathe, and proving that you can create something of absolute sheer beauty by doing so. Those closing refrains on Runai melt into the silence, and as a listener you're hooked to hear that final note ring out once again, but it never does. So what do? You listen to the album again and again and again. That's my experience with The Laughingstock anyway. An incredibly sophisticated yet unrefined piece of pastoral genius. And I really hope, if you have never heard this album before, that this video convinces you to go out and listen to this album right now, because it is so worth your time. And as such, I think it is a Deep Cuts essential. Next week I'll be back with a guide. This time it'll be a guide to Radiohead. I've been promising it for ages. It's finally going to come out. I'm going to make good on my word. So I will see you soon with that. See you later.